This is the story of America's beginnings. But if you're rethinking we re-gone, nah, start with the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock or the first permanent English settlement at Jamestown. Well, you've got another think coming. This is the story of America's untold story, the struggle to survive. Hi everyone, welcome to this channel. As you know, the traditional account holds that the United States began in 1620 when the Mayflower arrived carrying those intrepid pilgrims who established a settlement in what became the state of Massachusetts. And that's wrong, or at least incomplete. You see, there were people living in North America long before then, thousands of years before. There were thriving cultures, cities, even universities, but somehow their stories haven't made it into the history books. In 1965, something remarkable happened. A group of explorers landed in the United States, specifically Florida. They came from Spain. They were led by a man named Pedro, and his expedition was the first European one to reach the mainland of the United States. He'd actually been sent there by King Philip II of Spain to establish a settlement and claim it for Spain. So they arrived in 1565, more than 6 decades before the Pilgrims set foot in what would become New England. And they did it 130 years before Jamestown. And so, the men under command are the true founders of the United States of America. At least that's what some folks believe. More on that in a minute. But let's be clear, indigenous peoples had already been living in what is now the United States for tens of thousands of years. For them, the history of this land goes back to time immemorial. Their oral histories hold the traditions, stories, and memories of their ancestors passed down through generations. But we're talking about a different kind of history here. We're talking about the history that shows up in documents and artifacts, things like written records, diaries, letters, tools, buildings, and other physical objects left behind by people who lived in the past. It's a lot like a jigsaw puzzle, only a lot more complicated. All of these pieces fit together to form a picture of our collective past. But some of the pieces are missing, which makes the picture incomplete. Sometimes it seems like those missing pieces are lost forever, but every once in a while, one of those elusive pieces turns up, and that can change everything. For instance, in 2015, an archaeologist uncovered a box filled with old documents. They were written in a language most folks don't know, an archaic Spanish script. But not long after that, an expert in archaic Spanish script, Dr. Michael Francis, who's a professor of history at the University of Florida, took a look at them and realized they were a first-hand account of the 1565 expedition to Florida. And that's important because they were written by someone who was actually there. He was the notary and the secretary of the expedition, which means he was with the explorers the whole time. His name was Francisco Diaz Wacongan, and his writings contain some pretty interesting stuff. One thing they revealed is that the expedition landed right here in what is now St. Augustine, just over there on the other side of the Matanzas Bay. Well, recently, a group of reenactors set out to retrace the steps of the 1565 expedition. They sailed across the Atlantic on a replica of the ships used back in the 16th century, and on September, they landed in St. Augustine. Now, when they got there, they weren't greeted by empty shores. There were already people living there. In fact, there had been for thousands of years. These lands had been occupied by the Timucua-speaking peoples for a very long time. When Pedro arrived, he encountered a chief named Tucubaga, along with many others. Called them Indians, but that's a misnomer since the people he met were not actually indigenous to India. The term Indian was used by Europeans because they thought they had reached the East Indies, but these explorers had actually stumbled upon the Americas. And this was long before Christopher Columbus ever set sail for the New World. So the people met weren't just native to this land, they were also the first people of the Americas that Europeans had encountered. Of course, we know now that people had lived in North and South America for thousands of years before this. But that wasn't known back then. Didn't know that, and he didn't realize he was meeting some of the first inhabitants of the Americas. Instead, he believed that he was the first, that he was discovering this land and its people. But these first encounters were mostly peaceful. Wrote that he treated the natives with courtesy and gave them gifts, and he established a friendly relationship with the local chief. That didn't last, though. As time went on, tensions rose, and eventually there was violence. Was determined to claim Florida for Spain, and he wanted the people living there to convert to Christianity. He founded a mission and tried to convert the natives, but not everyone was open to that. Some resisted, and there were clashes between the two groups. The Spanish considered the natives pagans, and the natives saw the Spanish as outsiders trying to impose their beliefs on them. So why is this important? Why should we care about the first encounters between Europeans and Native Americans? Because it's a story that has been overlooked, minimized, or just plain forgotten. The traditional narrative of American history usually skips over this part. It jumps from the arrival of Columbus to the founding of Jamestown or Plymouth. But what happened in between those two events was just as significant. When you think about it, this is the point where two worlds collided: the Old World and the New World, Europe and the Americas. This was a time of great exploration and discovery, but it was also a time of conquest and colonization. This period had a profound impact on the course of world history. It marked the beginning of globalization and the interconnectedness of different cultures and economies. But it also led to the subjugation and displacement of indigenous populations. And the encounter between Pedro and the indigenous peoples of Florida was a microcosm of that larger pattern. But it's not just about understanding the past, it's about appreciating the complexity of history and acknowledging the diversity of cultures that have shaped our world. The story of the first encounters between Europeans and Native Americans is a story that needs to be told. It's a story that has been silenced for too long. But now, thanks to the work of historians and archaeologists, we're finally beginning to hear it. The city of St. Augustine, Florida, played a pivotal role in this encounter, making it a fitting location for the ceremonial landing of and his crew. The reenactment of this historic event in 2015 was a testament to the enduring legacy of these first encounters. The city was decorated with Spanish flags and banners, and costumed reenactors brought the era to life. The event drew visitors from all over the country and even internationally. As the replica ships approached the shore, a crowd gathered to watch. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. When the ships finally docked, cheers and applause erupted. The reenactors disembarked and began to explore the city, taking in the sights and sounds of this historic place. Many of them interacted with the crowd, answering questions and sharing stories about the expedition. There was a sense of pride in their voices as they described the journey across the ocean and the challenges they faced along the way. One of the most moving aspects of the event was the ceremony held in honor of the expedition. Local dignitaries and members of the Spanish-American community were in attendance. The ceremony included speeches, music, and dance, as well as a reenactment of the original landing. The speeches paid tribute to the courage and determination of the explorers who had braved the unknown in search of new lands and new opportunities. The music and dance performances celebrated the rich cultural heritage of the Spanish and the impact it has had on Florida's history. The reenactment of the landing itself was a highlight of the event. The reenactors marched in formation onto the shore, carrying their weapons and wearing their 16th century attire. The scene was both awe-inspiring and humbling, bringing to life a moment that had been frozen in time for centuries. The crowd watched in silence as the reenactment unfolded, their attention focused on every move the reenactors made. When it was over, the applause was deafening. The landing of Pedro and his crew was an important moment in history. It marked the beginning of Spain's colonization of Florida, and had a lasting impact on the course of the region's history. The events of 2015 were a fitting tribute to the courage, determination and spirit of exploration that had brought these explorers to these shores all those years ago. It was a chance to learn about a significant moment in history and to celebrate the rich cultural heritage of the Spanish and the indigenous peoples who had called Florida home for centuries. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for joining us and learning about the untold story of America's struggle to survive. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and share it with your friends. Subscribe to this channel for more exciting historical tales.